Hey guys, welcome to Clickoko channel. In today's video, I'll be making a diorama based on one of my favorite movies and book series, Dune. At the time of the recording of this video, I actually just got back from watching Dune Part 2. I enjoyed it even more than the first one, and it is definitely in my top 10 favorite movies. We will be starting this diorama the same way I start all my dioramas, by making a rough sketch of a general idea that I'm going for. Sketching out just helps me to combine all of the different ideas that I have in my head into one cohesive piece. I have this vision of a Fremen facing a sandworm. I want this Fremen to be standing on top of the sand dune, and then the sandworm is popping out of the sand in front of him. In my head, this guy's getting ready to ride the worm, but whether or not he'll succeed in his goals, I guess we'll never know. I want this sandworm to be rather large compared to the Fremen, and the idea is for the worm to tower over that little dude. I found this STL file of a sandworm from Lord of the Rings on my mini factory, and it looks really close to the one that's in the movie, and that is exactly what I was looking for. There was an option to print just the head portion of the worm, and it was in 3 separate pieces, because build plate for my 3D printer is tiny. But I guess it's not about the size, it's how you use it. That being said, it would really be helpful to have a bigger build plate, because with this one I could only fit 2 parts at a time and I could only scale them up to 150%. But before I could start 3D printing, I had to move this cute fluff face, because I didn't want him to breathe in any of the resin fumes. I always try to make sure that I'm wearing gloves, long sleeve sweater or shirt, respirator mask, and safety glasses to protect myself from exposure to resin. The last thing you want is resin on your skin or in your eyes. I filled up the vat with resin and started the 3D printing. Estimated time was 4 hours, so I left it 3D printing overnight, and then I came back to check on a 3D print the next morning. And an empty build plate is what was waiting for me there. Unfortunately, printing failed overnight, so I had to start over again. I had to start over again because I wasn't sure if there were any pieces stuck to the bottom of the resin vat, and I'd rather be safe than sorry, because we don't want another fail, right? Right? And as you can probably tell from a little bit of my foreshadowing, the print failed again. But no worries, 3rd time's the charm, right? Right? Wrong. It failed again. Well, at the very least, it printed one of the parts, which is better than none, I guess.
Holy pickles. I think it actually printed it this time.
Yeah.
This is probably the most satisfying part of the 3D printing for me. It's just something about snapping off print support that feels oddly satisfying. You've probably noticed that my voice sounds different now. It's because out of nowhere, my mic settings just reset for no reason, so I had to adjust everything all over again. But on the plus side, it sounds better now. After I was done with cleaning off the supports and washing all the resin off the model, I put all the parts in the curing machine and I left them bathing in UV lights for 2 minutes. After the parts were baked to a crisp, all I had to do is just glue them all together. Nothing really special here, I just had to make sure that I line up the parts properly because the glue that I'm using here has really fast drying time. So here's what it looks like glued together. Now the only thing that I'll need to take care of is just these gaps where the parts connect. This is one of the reasons why I don't like printing things in multiple parts. It just creates extra work, but I didn't really have other options, so I guess it is what it is. I printed Fremen in 3 different sizes just because I wasn't sure which one would look right, because I wanted the worm to be a lot bigger than this dude, and at the same time I wanted to be able to actually paint it and see what I'm painting, and I also wanted the viewer to be able to tell the details when they're looking at the diorama in person. So I went with the biggest option out of these 3 guys. Unfortunately, his grappling hooks or worm hooks or whatever the heck they're called, they broke when I was taking off the supports, so I just had to glue them back, but I lost the actual parts that's supposed to go there. So I snapped some parts off the 2 smaller guys and I glued them on, and the miniature is so small that you can't even tell that those parts don't belong there. And then I went on to filling up the gaps on the worm. For those of you who are interested, I was using acrylic resin plastic putty from Vallejo. It is very easy to work with and it dries pretty quick, and then it's very easy to sand it down. The only negative thing that I can say about this putty is that it shrinks a lot, so you want to make sure that you put a little bit extra on top. And then when I was done with that and it was dry, I sanded everything down to a nice smooth finish. And it was time to start building the base. I busted out a big old sheet of pink insulation foam. I wasn't exactly sure what width I need to go with, so I cut it a little bit wider than needs to be, and then I just used the worm to figure out the ideal width for the base. I also cut some styrene sheets to get a nice smooth finish on the sides of my base because the pink insulation foam has rough sides and it just doesn't look right. I use wood glue to glue them on. It is safe to use on foam, unlike the super glue that melts it, and it also dries rock hard, so it can be used as a gap filler and then sand it down. I then used the leftover bit of styrofoam and I used it to create some variation in the terrain. My main goal was to create a big dune that the worm is coming out of, and then another one for the Fremen. And then I also wanted to create some smaller dunes in between just so the base doesn't look as boring, because it is already a desert base and desert is as boring as it gets. That's me after I just said that the movie about a desert is my favorite movie. Then drywall putty got involved, and I used it to give it a little bit more of a realistic uniform look and not like it's a desert biome from Minecraft. I waited for the drywall putty to fully dry, then I once again sanded everything down until it was silky smooth. Then I sealed everything using Mod Podge mixed with black paint. I did that to protect the foam from the super glue that I was gonna use in one of the upcoming steps, because as I mentioned briefly before, super glue melts the foam unless you get a foam safe super glue, which I did not have. After that, using 2-part putty, I sculpted edges of the dunes because I wasn't able to do that with the drywall putty. After that dried rock solid, I used some white glue, or for those of you in Europe, PVA glue, spread it around the base with some water. And then in true 80s fashion, I used some white powder to make the magic happen. And by white powder, I of course mean cooking baking soda. And then before the glue was dry, I used some sculpting tools to give the sand a little bit of a wavy texture. To solidify everything, I used some very thin super glue, and when super glue combines with baking soda, it dries and hardens really quick, which worked out perfectly for me. And the next step is to base coat and paint everything, which is definitely my favorite, or at least one of my favorite parts of the project, because this is where everything comes together and starts looking like one cohesive piece instead of a collection of random bits and pieces glued together. I painted the sand using 10 colors and also some 11 colors. With every step I kept adding more and more yellow paint to the mix. I went with the brown base coat for the worm. I also made sure to drop it once for good measure. After I was done with initial base coats, I used some makeup brushes to give the sand base a dry brush, using some yellow paint mixed with really light beige paint. I used the same technique for Shai Hulud, but this time I used gray paint because the worm was gray in the movie. For the Fremen, I used the same gray that I used for the worm, but I added a little bit of purple to it. And for the armor, I went with the black color. For the cape, I used the same colors as I used for the sand, because that's the whole point of wearing those capes, to blend in with the sand. I also tried to simulate some texture on the cape, because in the movie it looks like it's a similar material to a bull wrap sack, I guess. But of course I won't be able to show you the process of that, because I blocked the camera with my brain container. Afterwards, I just glued everything in place, but the sandworm didn't perfectly fit into the spot that I intended, so there were some rather large gaps left around the model. Luckily, I was gonna create a dust and moving sand effect around the worm to make it look like he's in the process of coming out of the sand. And I did it by simply gluing some cotton balls around the worm, and then I sprayed it with the same paint that I used for the base coat of the sand. As a finishing touch, I added some dry pigments all around the base, the Shai Hulud and the Fremen. To finish everything up, I used some matte black paint for the rims of the diorama to make it look nice and sharp. And that was it, ladies and gentlemen.